A dying CEO with only 1 month left disguises himself and walks into his own restaurant, where he finds a waitress crying alone. The truth behind her tears leaves him completely frozen. Share where you're watching from in the comments. Thanks for your support. Get ready for a story with an unexpected surprise waiting for you. The rain hammered against the windows of Sterling Heights, the five-star restaurant that had made Alexander Sterling a household name across America. Inside his penthouse office, miles away from the establishment, Alexander sat in the darkness, staring at the medical report that had shattered his world exactly 48 hours ago. Terminal pancreatic cancer, 4 weeks, maybe 5 if he was lucky. At 34 years old, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming a single struggling diner into a chain of upscale restaurants that stretched from New York to Los Angeles. And now, none of it mattered. He crumpled the paper and threw it across the room, watching it bounce off the wall and land near the trash can. He had spent the last 2 days in this office, ignoring calls from his board members, his investors, his supposed friends. The only person who knew the truth was Dr. Harrison, and Alexander had sworn him to secrecy. No one could know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What was the point of sympathy when you were already dead? Alexander stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the mahogany desk. He needed to get out, to feel something other than the numbness that had settled into his bones. He needed to see his creation one last time, not as the CEO who commanded respect and fear, but as an ordinary person, someone who could observe without being observed. The idea took root quickly. 20 minutes later, Alexander stood in front of his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing himself. He had traded his $1,000 suit for worn jeans and a simple black hoodie. A baseball cap covered his normally styled dark hair, and he had deliberately skipped shaving, allowing his stubble to grow out. Without his usual commanding presence and expensive attire, he looked like any other tired man in his 30s. Perfect. Sterling Heights was a 30-minute drive from his penthouse. Alexander took his personal car, a modest sedan he kept for the rare occasions when he wanted privacy, rather than the company limousine. The rain had eased to a drizzle by the time he pulled into the parking lot. It was 8 in the evening, and the restaurant should have been bustling with the dinner crowd. Through the large windows, he could see the elegant interior he had designed himself, the soft lighting reflecting off crystal chandeliers, well-dressed patrons enjoying their meals. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but Alexander knew better. He had been tracking the numbers, had seen the steady decline in this particular location's performance over the past 6 months. Revenue was down 15%, customer complaints had tripled, and staff turnover was at an all-time high. His regional manager, Tom Chen, had assured him it was just a temporary dip that they were handling it. Looking at it now, Alexander wondered what he had been missing. He pulled the cap lower over his eyes and walked toward the entrance. The hostess, a young woman he did not recognize, barely glanced at him before telling him there would be a 20-minute wait. He nodded and moved to the bar area, taking a seat in the corner where he could observe the dining room. What he saw made his jaw clench. His head waiter, Marcus, was openly flirting with a customer while her husband sat right there, clearly uncomfortable. 2 tables nearby had empty water glasses, and no one was attending to them. In the far corner, he spotted Tom Chen laughing loudly with a group at a private table, a glass of wine in his hand. On the clock, Alexander thought grimly. The bartender approached, and Alexander ordered a whiskey, keeping his voice low and unremarkable. As he waited, he scanned the room more carefully, cataloguing every failure, every deviation from the standards he had built his reputation on. This was worse than he had imagined. Then he saw her. She emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray loaded with dishes, moving with quick, efficient steps, despite the obvious weight. She was small, probably around 5'4", with light brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, mid-20s, he guessed. What caught his attention was not her appearance, but the way she worked. While the other servers chatted and moved at a leisurely pace, this woman was everywhere at once, refilling water glasses that others had neglected, clearing tables, even stopping to pick up a napkin that had fallen on the floor. She wore the same uniform as the others, but something had not occurred to Alexander before. Her name tag read Michelle. He watched as she delivered the meals to a family of 4, smiling warmly at the children and making sure everyone had what they needed before moving on. There was a genuine kindness in her interactions, a stark contrast to the mechanical service he observed from most of the other staff. She had no idea what was about to happen. Alexander continued watching Michelle throughout the evening. She handled a difficult customer with grace when the man complained about his steak temperature, immediately offering to have it corrected without any defensiveness. She helped an elderly woman who had dropped her purse, collecting the scattered contents with patience and care. She was exactly the kind of employee he had always tried to cultivate, the kind that seemed to be disappearing from this location. But he also noticed other things. The way some of the other servers rolled their eyes when she passed. How Tom Chen ignored her when she tried to get his attention about something. The subtle shoulder check Marcus gave her as he walked by, making her stumble slightly. She was being bullied, Alexander realized with growing anger, and management was either participating in it or turning a blind eye. The evening crowd began to thin out around 10 o'clock. Alexander remained at the bar, nursing his second whiskey, watching as the staff started their closing duties. Most of them did the bare minimum, leaving messes for the next shift, cutting corners wherever they thought no one would notice. But not Michelle. She methodically cleaned her section, helped the busboys stack chairs, and even wiped down tables that were not in her area. By 11, the restaurant was nearly empty. The kitchen staff had left, and most of the servers had clocked out. Alexander saw Tom Chen leave through the front door, not bothering to do a final walkthrough. Marcus and 2 other servers went out the back, laughing about something. That was when Alexander decided to do one final check of the premises before leaving. He stood and stretched, pretending to head toward the restroom, but instead moving deeper into the restaurant. The dining room was dark now, lit only by the emergency exit signs and the dim light coming from the kitchen. He was about to turn back when he heard it, crying. Soft, muffled sobs coming from somewhere near the back of the restaurant. Alexander froze, every instinct telling him to investigate. He moved quietly toward the sound, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. In the far corner, in a small alcove near the kitchen entrance, he found her. Michelle sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and even in the dim light, Alexander could see tears streaming down her face. She had no idea he was there, lost in whatever pain had brought her to this moment. Alexander stood paralyzed, watching this young woman fall apart in the darkness of his restaurant. The truth behind her tears, when he learned it, would freeze him completely. But right now, in this moment, all he could do was watch as she cried, alone and broken, in the empire he had built. And something inside him, something he thought had died with that diagnosis 2 days ago, stirred back to life. This moment would change everything. He should have walked away. It was the logical thing to do, the safe thing. He was supposed to be invisible tonight, just an observer collecting information about his failing restaurant. Getting involved would blow his cover, raise questions he was not prepared to answer. But Alexander had never been good at walking away from problems, and the sight of this woman, this dedicated employee who had spent her entire evening caring for others, now crying alone in the dark, triggered something primal in him. Before he could talk himself out of it, he stepped forward. His shoes scraped against the tile floor, and Michelle's head snapped up. Even in the darkness, he could see her eyes widen with surprise and embarrassment. She scrambled to her feet, quickly wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, her voice thick with emotion. "The restaurant is closed. I didn't realize anyone was still here." Alexander kept his distance, not wanting to frighten her further. Up close, he could see that she was younger than he had initially thought, maybe 26 or 27. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and there was a raw vulnerability in her expression that made his chest tighten. "I was just leaving," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I heard someone crying and wanted to make sure everything was okay." Michelle let out a shaky laugh, wiping at her face again. "Everything is fine. Just a long day. You should go." But she did not move, and neither did Alexander. They stood there in the dim light, two strangers connected by a moment of unexpected intimacy. Alexander knew he should leave, should respect her privacy and her clear desire to be alone. But that stubborn part of him, the part that had built a restaurant empire through sheer determination and refusal to accept defeat, would not let him walk away. "You're Michelle, right?" he said, gesturing to her name tag. "I saw you working earlier. You're a good server, very attentive." She looked surprised that he had noticed. "Thank you. Are you a regular? I don't remember seeing you before." "First time here," Alexander lied smoothly. "Special occasion." Michelle nodded, seeming to relax slightly. Maybe it was the darkness, or the late hour, or the fact that she had already been caught at her most vulnerable, but something in her posture shifted. The defensive walls came down just a fraction. "Did you enjoy your meal?" she asked, falling back into professional mode, even with tears still drying on her cheeks. "The service could have been better," Alexander said honestly, "but you were excellent, which is why it bothers me to see you upset." "Bad day?" Michelle's composure cracked slightly. She looked away, her jaw tightening. "You could say that." Alexander waited, sensing she needed to talk but was not sure if she should. He'd spent years reading people, understanding what they needed, even when they could not articulate it themselves. Right now, Michelle needed someone to listen, someone who was not part of the toxic environment he had witnessed tonight. "Want to talk about it?" he offered. "Sometimes it helps to tell a stranger. I promise I'm a good listener." Michelle studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could trust this mysterious customer who had found her crying in the dark. Alexander held her gaze, projecting calm and safety, even as his heart hammered in his chest. He told himself it was just curiosity about his employee's situation, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Finally, Michelle sighed and leaned back against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Do you have family?" she asked suddenly. The question caught Alexander off guard. He thought of his empty penthouse, his absent parents who had never approved of his restaurant career, the shallow friendships that had not survived his recent withdrawal. "Not really," he admitted. "Not anymore." Michelle nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My dad," she said quietly, "he's sick, very sick, cancer. He's—" The word hit Alexander like a physical blow. He forced himself to remain still, to not react, even as every muscle in his body tensed. "I'm sorry," he managed. "That must be incredibly difficult." Tears welled up in Michelle's eyes again. "He has maybe a month left, the doctors say, maybe less. And I've been trying to save money for his care, for hospice, for the funeral costs, but it's never enough. Every time I think I'm getting ahead, something happens. Tonight, Tom, my manager, told me I'm being cut to part-time hours. Said the restaurant is overstaffed, and I'm the newest server, so I'm the first to go." Alexander's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Tom Chen was lying. The restaurant was understaffed, if anything, running on a skeleton crew while management pocketed the savings. "That's illegal," he said, his voice harder than he intended. If you've been here for more than 90 days, they can't reduce your hours without cause. Michelle looked at him with surprise. You know employment law? I know enough, Alexander said, forcing himself to relax. Have you considered fighting it? Filing a complaint? She laughed bitterly. With what money? What time? I need this job, even part-time. I can't afford to make waves. Tom said if I complained, I'd be gone entirely. So I smiled and said thank you, and came back here to fall apart where no one could see me. Except he had seen. Alexander felt rage building in his chest, a white-hot anger at Tom Chen, at Marcus, at every person who had failed this woman and his restaurant. But beneath the anger was something else, something he had not felt in 2 days since receiving his diagnosis. Purpose. How much do you need? Alexander asked before he could stop himself. Michelle blinked. What? For your father's care. How much do you need? She shook her head immediately. I can't take money from a stranger. That's not why I told you. I know, Alexander said, but I'm asking anyway. How much? Michelle stared at him, confusion and suspicion warring on her face. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Because I'm dying too, Alexander thought. Because I have more money than I could ever spend, and only weeks to spend it. Because you're the first real thing I've encountered in months, maybe years. Because watching you cry made me feel something other than numb. But he did not say any of that. Instead, he pulled out his wallet and extracted 5 $100 bills. It was all the cash he had on him, a pittance compared to what he could give her, but it was a start. Take it, he said, holding out the money. No strings attached. Use it for your father. Michelle looked at the cash like it might bite her. I can't. This is too much. I don't even know your name. Alex, he said, using the nickname he had not gone by since college. And it's not too much. It's barely anything. Please, take it. For a moment, he thought she would refuse. Pride warred with desperation in her eyes. But then she looked down at the money, and he saw her resolve crumble. She took the bills with shaking hands. Thank you, she whispered. I'll pay you back. I promise I'll find a way to pay you back. Don't worry about it, Alexander said. Just take care of your father. That's all that matters. They stood there in the darkness, the money clutched in Michelle's hand, a connection forming between them that neither could quite explain. Alexander knew he should leave now, should disappear back into his disguise and his dying life. But he found himself reluctant to go. Reluctant to step away from this woman who had reminded him what it felt like to care about something beyond his own mortality. And before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe for more. Now, let's see what happens next. 3 days later, Alexander sat in his executive office, staring at the employee file on his desk. Michelle Parker, 26 years old, bachelor's degree in hospitality management from a state university. Hired at Sterling Heights 8 months ago. Glowing reviews from customers, mediocre evaluations from management, no disciplinary issues. And as of 3 days ago, illegally reduced to part-time status. He had spent those 3 days investigating, using resources Tom Chen did not know he had. What he discovered made his blood boil. Tom had been systematically cutting hours for the best employees while padding the schedules of his friends and relatives. The restaurant was hemorrhaging money, not because of market conditions, but because of incompetence and corruption. Michelle was just one victim among many. Alexander picked up his phone and dialed his head of human resources. Karen, it's Alexander. I need you to fire Tom Chen immediately. Yes, the regional manager for Sterling Heights. Effective today. Compile a full report on his employment practices over the past year. I want documentation of every hour he cut, every preferential schedule he made. He listened to Karen's questions. her surprise evident even through the phone. "No, I don't want to wait for a formal review. He violated company policy and broke labor laws. Fire him now and prepare for potential lawsuits from affected employees. I want them compensated." After hanging up, Alexander leaned back in his chair, feeling a grim satisfaction. It was a start, but it was not enough. He had the power to fix the systematic problems at Sterling Heights. But what about Michelle specifically? What about her dying father and the medical bills that were crushing her? He could write a check that would solve all her problems. Hell, he could pay off her father's entire medical debt, and she would never know where the money came from. But something held him back. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him in that dark restaurant, with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Maybe it was the fierce pride that had made her initially refuse his help. Or maybe, Alexander admitted to himself, it was because he wanted to see her again. He wanted to be Alex, the kind stranger, not Alexander Sterling, the dying CEO. His phone buzzed with the text from Dr. Harrison. Appointment reminder, 3 weeks left, maybe less. Time is running out. Alexander deleted the message and stood. He had spent 3 days behind his desk, but his mind kept returning to that dark alcove, to Michelle's tears, to the way his heart had started beating again for the first time since his diagnosis. He needed to see her, not as her boss, but as Alex, the man who had given her $500 and asked for nothing in return, the man who had made her smile, even briefly, on the worst night of her life. He grabbed his car keys and the baseball cap from his closet. 40 minutes later, Alexander walked into Sterling Heights in the same disguise as before. It was early evening, the dinner rush just beginning. The atmosphere felt different already. Tom Chen was gone, and the assistant manager, a competent woman named Sarah, whom Tom had kept suppressed, was running the floor with quiet efficiency. But Alexander's eyes found Michelle immediately. She was seating a family of 5, her smile warm and genuine despite the exhaustion he could see in her eyes. She wore her uniform with the same professionalism as before, but something was different. There was a lightness in her step that had not been there 3 days ago. She had not spotted him yet. Alexander took a seat at the bar again, the same corner spot where he could watch without being obvious. The bartender, a young man named Jake, approached with a friendly smile. "What can I get you?" "Whiskey, neat," Alexander said, "and whatever the special is tonight." As Jake prepared his drink, Alexander watched Michelle work. She was good, really good. Every interaction with customers was genuine, every movement efficient. She caught a child's cup before it could spill, laughed at an elderly man's joke, patiently explained menu items to a couple who could not decide what to order. This was what he had envisioned when he built his restaurant empire. This kind of service, this genuine care for the customer experience. And Tom Chen had tried to destroy it, had tried to drive her out. The rage he felt was tempered by satisfaction. Tom was gone. Michelle's hours would be restored. Justice, at least in this small corner of his empire, had been served, but she did not know that yet. The news would not reach the staff until tomorrow. Tonight, she was still working under the assumption that her hours had been cut, that her father's care was in jeopardy, that she was barely holding on. Alexander's meal arrived, and he ate slowly, watching. Midway through dinner, Michelle finally noticed him. She was passing by the bar with an empty tray when her eyes landed on his face. Recognition flashed across her features, followed by surprise, then something that looked like pleasure. She changed direction and approached him, a genuine smile on her face. "Alex," she said, and he liked the way his nickname sounded in her voice. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I enjoyed the restaurant," Alexander said, returning her smile. "Thought I'd come back. How are you, Michelle?" Her smile faltered slightly. "I'm okay. Better, actually. Thanks to you." She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. That money you gave me, it covered a week of my dad's medication. You have no idea what that meant." Alexander's chest tightened. $500, a week of medication. The disparity between his wealth and her struggle was staggering. "I'm glad I could help," he said sincerely. Michelle hesitated, then pulled out a small envelope from her apron pocket. "I know you said not to worry about paying you back, but I wanted to give you something. It's just $50, and I know it's not much, but it's a start. I promise I'll pay back the rest." Alexander stared at the envelope, at this woman who had so little but still insisted on honoring a debt she did not owe. Something cracked inside his chest. "Keep it," he said firmly. "Michelle, keep your money. Use it for your father." "But I promised, and I'm releasing you from that promise," Alexander interrupted gently. "Please, it would mean more to me knowing you used it for what you needed." Tears welled in Michelle's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." "Because I'm dying," Alexander thought. "Because I have 3 weeks left and nothing matters except making someone's life a little better. Because you made me feel human again when I thought that part of me was already dead." "Maybe I want to know you," he said instead, the words surprising both of them. Michelle's eyes widened. A blush crept up her cheeks. "Are you asking me out?" The question hung in the air between them. Alexander had not planned this, had not thought beyond seeing her again, but now that the possibility was out there, he found himself wanting it with an intensity that shocked him. "What time do you get off work?" he asked. 10, Michelle said, her voice uncertain. "But I can't. I have to get home to my dad. The nurse leaves at 10:30 and I need to be there." "Tomorrow then," Alexander pressed. "Do you have a day off?" "Saturday. I'm off at 2. "Coffee at 3, Alexander suggested. "There's a cafe down the street. Nothing fancy, just coffee and conversation. What do you say?" Michelle bit her lip, clearly torn. "I don't usually date customers." "I'm not really a customer," Alexander pointed out. "I'm just a guy who happened to walk into a restaurant and meet an incredible woman." The compliment made her blush deepen. "You don't know if I'm incredible. We've barely talked." "Then let's talk," Alexander said. "Saturday, 3 o'clock, 1 hour. If you hate it, you never have to see me again." Michelle studied his face, searching for something. Alexander held still, letting her look, hoping she would see sincerity, if not the whole truth. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, 1 hour. But if this is weird, I'm leaving." "Fair enough," Alexander agreed, relief flooding through him. Michelle smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face. "I should get back to work, but I'll see you Saturday." "Saturday," Alexander confirmed. He watched her walk away, that light step even more pronounced now. What was he doing? He had 3 weeks to live, maybe less. Starting something with Michelle was cruel, selfish, impossible. But as he watched her laugh with a table of customers, as he felt his heart beat faster with anticipation for Saturday, Alexander could not bring himself to care. For 3 days, he had been a dead man walking. Michelle made him feel alive. That had to count for something. He finished his meal and left a generous tip for Jake, then slipped out into the evening air. His phone buzzed with another message from Dr. Harrison, but Alexander ignored it. He had spent 2 weeks drowning in his mortality. Tonight, for the first time, he had something to look forward to. Saturday could not come fast enough. But Alexander did not know that by Saturday, everything would change. Little did he know that the choice to pursue Michelle would set in motion a series of events that would force him to confront not just his mortality, but the very meaning of the life he had built. The universe had a cruel sense of timing, and Alexander Sterling's time was running out faster than anyone realized. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth. the kind of perfect autumn day that made Alexander acutely aware of everything he was about to lose. He stood outside the cafe at 2:45, dressed in his Alex disguise, but feeling more exposed than he ever had in a boardroom. His hands were sweating. When had he last been nervous about meeting a woman? College, maybe. Before his empire, before his reputation, before terminal cancer made every moment precious and terrifying. Michelle appeared at 3 o'clock exactly, walking down the sidewalk in jeans and a soft blue sweater that made her eyes shine. Her hair was down today, falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She looked younger without her work uniform, more vulnerable, and absolutely beautiful. "Hi," she said, slightly breathless, as if she had hurried to be on time. "You came," Alexander said, relief evident in his voice. "You sound surprised." Michelle smiled. "I told you I would. I always keep my promises." They went inside and ordered coffee. Alexander insisted on paying despite Michelle's protests. They found a corner table by the window, away from the lunch crowd still lingering. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two people on the edge of something neither quite understood. "So," Michelle said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup, "tell me about yourself, Alex. What do you do?" Alexander had prepared for this question, had his cover story ready. He was a consultant, he told her, business management, traveled a lot for work, but was taking some time off. Vague enough to be believable, specific enough to avoid suspicion. "Sounds lonely," Michelle observed. "All that traveling." "It can be," Alexander admitted, and that at least was true. "What about you? Have you always wanted to work in restaurants?" Michelle laughed. "God, no. I wanted to be a teacher. Elementary school. I love kids, love the idea of shaping young minds." She looked down at her coffee. "But my mum died when I was 19, and Dad got sick a year later. Medical bills ate through their savings. I dropped out of college, took whatever job I could find to help with expenses. Sterling Heights was hiring, and the pay was decent. That was 8 months ago." "You gave up your dream to take care of your father," Alexander said quietly. Michelle shrugged. "What else would I do? He's my dad. He spent 20 years working 2 jobs to give me and my brother a good life. I can sacrifice a few years to make sure his last months are comfortable." "Your brother doesn't help." Michelle's expression darkened. "David moved to California 5 years ago. We barely talk. He sends a check occasionally, but he says he can't deal with watching Dad die, so it's just me." Alexander felt his anger stir again, this time directed at a man he had never met. "That's not fair to you." "Life isn't fair," Michelle said with a sad smile. "You know that as well as anyone, I'm sure." If only she knew. They talked for 2 hours, long past the 1 hour Michelle had agreed to. She told him about her father, about the man he had been before cancer had hollowed him out, a carpenter who built beautiful furniture, who taught her to appreciate craftsmanship, who made her laugh even when times were hard. She told him about her best friend from high school, who had stopped calling when Michelle's life became too depressing, about the nursing program she dreamed of joining if she ever got her life back on track. Alexander listened, asking questions, genuinely interested in every detail of this woman's life. He told her carefully edited versions of his own stories, about building something from nothing, though he did not mention it was a restaurant empire, about the loneliness of success, though he did not mention the fortune that came with it, about the feeling of running out of time. would not tell her any of it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What happened next shocked everyone, though only Alexander knew it was coming. The lies he had built would crumble soon, but not before they pulled both him and Michelle into a love that neither had expected, and that time itself seemed determined to destroy. Tuesday came too slowly and too quickly all at once. Alexander spent the intervening days in a haze of business meetings and doctor's appointments, his mind always returning to Michelle. Dr. Harrison had been blunt about his prognosis. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if he was lucky. The cancer was progressing faster than anticipated. Soon, the symptoms would become impossible to hide. But tonight, Alexander was just Alex. He met Michelle at a small Italian restaurant she had suggested, a mom-and-pop place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Nothing like the upscale establishments that bore his name, but somehow more genuine. Michelle arrived wearing a simple green dress that made her hair glow in the candlelight. She looked nervous and excited and beautiful, and Alexander felt his chest constrict with an emotion he could not quite name. "You look amazing," he said, standing to pull out her chair. Michelle blushed. "It's just an old dress. I don't get to dress up much." "Well, you should," Alexander said. "You're stunning." Dinner was easy in a way Alexander had not expected. They talked about everything and nothing, books they loved, movies they had cried over, dreams they had abandoned and dreams they still held close. Michelle told him about her father's good days and bad days, about the moments of clarity when he was still himself, and the long stretches when pain stole him away. "He wants to meet you," Michelle said suddenly, then looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that's too much too soon. I shouldn't have said that." "Why does he want to meet me?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious. Michelle played with her napkin. "I told him about the money you gave me, about how kind you've been. He wants to thank you personally. And I think," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I think he wants to make sure you're real, that I'm not being scammed or taken advantage of." "I'm real," Alexander assured her, "and I'd be honored to meet him, whenever you're ready." Michelle's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Really? You wouldn't mind? He's not always lucid, and the hospice equipment is everywhere, and it's depressing and awful, and—" "Michelle," Alexander interrupted gently, "I want to meet the man who raised someone as incredible as you. Whenever you're ready, no pressure." She reached across the table and took his hand, and Alexander felt that electric connection again, stronger this time. They sat there holding hands across the checkered tablecloth, 2 people falling into something neither had planned, but both desperately needed. After dinner, they walked through a nearby park. It was late October, and the trees were shedding their leaves in golden drifts. The air was crisp and cool, and Michelle shivered slightly. Without thinking, Alexander shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "You'll be cold," she protested. "I'm fine," Alexander lied. In truth, he had been feeling cold a lot lately, one of the symptoms Dr. Harrison had warned about. But he would freeze before he let Michelle be uncomfortable. They found a bench overlooking a small pond where ducks glided across the dark water. Michelle tucked herself against his side, and Alexander wrapped his arm around her, feeling like a teenager on his first date. "Can I ask you something?" Michelle said quietly. "Anything." "Why are you really here? In this city, I mean. You said you're a consultant taking time off, but there's something you're not telling me. I can feel it." Alexander's heart hammered. This was the moment. He could tell her the truth, lay everything out, let the cards fall where they may. Or he could continue the lie, protect her from the pain that was coming, steal a few more perfect moments before reality crashed in. "I'm sick," he said finally, choosing a middle path. "I came here to figure some things out, to decide how I want to spend the time I have left." Michelle pulled back to look at him, concern etched on her face. "Sick how? Is it serious? It's serious, Alexander admitted. The doctors say I have a few weeks, maybe a month. He watched emotions flicker across Michelle's face. Shock, disbelief, grief, and then understanding. That's why you gave me that money. Why you've been so kind. You know what it's like. I know what it's like, Alexander confirmed. Michelle's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Alex, I'm so sorry. I've been going on and on about my dad, and you're dealing with this yourself. Don't apologize, Alexander said, pulling her back against him. Being with you, hearing about your father, it helps. It reminds me that I'm not alone in this. That other people understand. They sat in silence for a long moment, two people bound by impending loss, finding comfort in each other's presence. Is that all I am to you? Michelle asked finally. Someone who understands. Alexander turned her face toward his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. You're so much more than that. You're the first thing that's made sense to me in weeks, the first person who's made me feel like living matters, even when I know I'm dying. That's a lot of pressure, Michelle whispered, but she was smiling through her tears. Can you handle it? Alexander asked, being with someone who has an expiration date? Michelle considered this seriously. I'm already watching my father die. I know how this ends, but I also know that the time we have matters more than the time we don't. So yes, Alex, I can handle it. The question is, can you handle being with someone who's going to fall apart when you're gone? No, maybe we can fall apart together, Alexander suggested, for however long we have. Michelle kissed him then, soft and sweet and tinged with salt from her tears. Alexander pulled her closer, memorizing the feel of her lips, the scent of her hair, the way she fit perfectly against him. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. We should probably talk about this, Michelle said, about what happens next. Or we could just see where it goes, Alexander suggested. No expectations, no promises beyond today, just two people making the most of the time they have. Michelle nodded. I'd like that. They stayed in the park until the cold drove them home. Alexander drove Michelle back to her car, and they sat in the parking lot talking for another hour, neither wanting the evening to end. Finally, Michelle glanced at her phone and gasped. It's past midnight. I have to get home. Dad's night nurse will be wondering where I am. Text me when you get home safe, Alexander said. So I know you made it okay. Michelle leaned across the console and kissed him again, quick and sweet. Thank you for tonight, for understanding, for being honest with me. Thank you for giving me a reason to look forward to tomorrow, Alexander replied. He watched her drive away, then sat in his car for a long moment, his phone in his hand. He should call Dr. Harrison, should schedule more appointments, should start preparing for the inevitable. Instead, he texted Michelle. Alex, I lied earlier. You're not just the first thing that's made sense. You're the only thing that matters. Her response came quickly. Michelle, then let's make it count. Whatever time we have, let's make it count. Alex, deal. Good night, Michelle. Michelle, good night, Alex. Come to dinner on Thursday. Dad wants to meet you. And I want you to know all of me, even the hard parts. Alex, I'll be there. What time? Michelle, 6. And Alex, thank you for tonight, for everything. Alexander drove home with a lightness in his chest that felt foreign after weeks of despair. He was falling in love with Michelle Parker, a woman who had as little time as he did, in a completely different way. It was reckless and beautiful, and doomed from the start, and he would not change a single moment of it. Thursday arrived with a steady rain that matched Alexander's nerves. Meeting Michelle's father felt monumental, a step into a future he would never have. But Michelle had invited him into the most private part of her life, and he would not refuse that gift. He arrived at her small house at 6 o'clock exactly, carrying flowers for Michelle and a bottle of expensive whiskey he hoped her father might enjoy. Michelle answered the door looking exhausted and stressed, but her face lit up when she saw him. "You came," she said, sounding relieved. "Of course I came," Alexander said, kissing her forehead. "How's he doing today?" "Good day," Michelle said. "He's lucid and in decent spirits. Just warning you, he's going to interrogate you. He's very protective." "I'd expect nothing less," Alexander assured her. Michelle's father, Robert Parker, was a shell of the man he must have once been. Cancer had stolen his weight and his color, leaving behind a frail figure propped up in a hospital bed that dominated the small living room. But his eyes were sharp and clear, and they studied Alexander with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. "So you're the mysterious Alex," Robert said, his voice raspy but strong. "Come closer. Let me get a look at the man who's been courting my daughter." Alexander approached and extended his hand. Robert's grip was weak but determined. "Mr. Parker, it's an honor to meet you. Michelle has told me so much about you." "I bet she has," Robert said with a slight smile. "All good things, I hope." "All good things," Alexander confirmed. "Please sit. Michelle says you're sick too, that you understand what it's like." Alexander glanced at Michelle, who gave him an encouraging nod. He sat in the chair beside Robert's bed. "I do. Terminal cancer. Doctors give me a few weeks." Robert studied him for a long moment. "That's why you gave her that money, why you've been so generous." "I wanted to help," Alexander said simply. "Then you're either a saint or a fool," Robert said bluntly. "Which is it?" "Probably a fool," Alexander admitted, "but a sincere one. Your daughter is extraordinary, Mr. Parker. I know I don't have much time, but whatever time I do have, I'd like to spend it getting to know her, if that's okay with you." Robert's expression softened slightly. "She deserves better than watching another person she loves die." "I know," Alexander said, "but she also deserves to be happy, even if it's just for a little while. I'd like to try to give her that, if you'll let me." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching Alexander's face. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But hurt her, and dying or not, I'll find a way to make you regret it." "Fair enough," Alexander agreed. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Michelle had made a simple pot roast, and they ate in the living room so Robert could participate. Alexander told carefully edited stories about his business consulting work, and Robert shared tales from his years as a carpenter, his hands moving expressively even though they could no longer hold tools. Michelle watched them both with shining eyes, clearly happy to see her father engaged and animated. After dinner, while Michelle cleaned up in the kitchen, Robert gestured Alexander closer. "Can I tell you something?" Robert asked quietly. "Of course. I'm worried about her, about what happens after I'm gone. She's put her whole life on hold to take care of me, and she won't have anything left when I'm not here anymore. No degree, no career prospects, just memories and medical debt." Robert's eyes were wet. "I don't want her to be alone." Alexander felt his throat tighten. "She won't be alone, I promise you that. You'll be dead," Robert pointed out bluntly. "How can you promise anything?" Alexander hesitated, then made a decision. "Mr. Parker, I need to tell you something, but I need you to keep it between us for now. I'm listening. I'm not just sick, I'm Alexander Sterling. I own the Sterling Heights restaurant chain, including the one where Michelle works. I have considerable resources, and I've already made arrangements. When I'm gone, Michelle will be taken care of. Her medical debt will be paid off, and there will be funds set aside for her education, for her future. She doesn't know yet, and I'm not ready to tell her, but I promise you she will not be left with nothing." Robert stared at him in shock. "You're Alexander Sterling, the CEO who's on magazine covers." "That's me. though I prefer to be just Alex when I'm with your daughter. Does she know? Not yet. I will tell her, but not until the time is right. For now, I just want to be a man falling in love with an incredible woman, not a dying billionaire making grand gestures." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "That's a hell of a secret to keep." "I know, but I wanted you to know, so you can rest easier. Michelle will be okay when we're both gone." "We," Robert repeated, and then he started to laugh, a wheezing sound that brought Michelle running from the kitchen. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked frantically. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Robert assured her, still chuckling. "Alex here was just telling me a joke. A very funny joke indeed." Michelle looked between them suspiciously. "What joke?" "Private man humor," Robert said. "You wouldn't appreciate it." Michelle rolled her eyes but smiled. "You two are already conspiring. Great." Alexander stayed until 9, helping Michelle with evening care routines that she handled with practiced efficiency. When it was time to leave, Robert shook his hand again. "Take care of her," Robert whispered, "for as long as you can." "I will," Alexander promised. Michelle walked him to his car. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under streetlights. "He likes you," Michelle said. "I can tell. He's not usually that talkative with strangers." "I like him too," Alexander said honestly. "He's a good man. You're lucky to have him as your father." "I know," Michelle said softly. "I just wish I had more time." "Make the most of what you have," Alexander advised, speaking as much to himself as to her. "That's all any of us can do." Michelle kissed him goodnight, long and sweet and full of promise. "I'm glad you came into my life, Alex, even though it's complicated and messy and probably going to end badly. I'm still glad." "So am I," Alexander whispered against her lips. "So am I." He drove away with Robert's secret burning in his chest. Soon, very soon, he would have to tell Michelle the truth. About who he really was, about the life he had lived, about the arrangements he had made for her future. But not tonight. Tonight, he was just Alex. A man in love with an extraordinary woman, making the most of the time they had left. 10 days passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing intimacy. Alexander and Michelle fell into a rhythm, seeing each other whenever her schedule allowed. Coffee dates before her shifts, late-night phone calls after her father fell asleep, quick lunches in the park when the November sun broke through the clouds. They were building something beautiful on a foundation of sand, and both knew it. Alexander's symptoms were getting worse. He tired more easily now, his appetite had vanished, and some mornings he woke drenched in cold sweat. Dr. Harrison had started him on pain medication and warned him that he had perhaps a week, maybe less. The end was coming faster than anyone had predicted. But when he was with Michelle, Alexander felt almost human again. She made him laugh with stories about difficult customers at the restaurant. She held his hand during movies and fell asleep on his shoulder during long conversations in his car. She kissed him like he was her whole world, not a dying man on borrowed time, and Alexander fell deeper in love with every moment they shared. It was a Monday afternoon when everything fell apart. Alexander had gone to Sterling Heights for a meeting with his executive team, something he could no longer avoid. He had been conducting most business remotely, but his board was getting restless. They needed to see him, needed reassurance that the empire was still being managed despite his absence. He had skipped the disguise today. This was official business, and he needed to be Alexander Sterling, CEO, not Alex the consultant. He wore one of his tailored suits, his hair was styled, and he carried himself with the authority that had built his fortune. The meeting was held in a private dining room at Sterling Heights. His team was already assembled when he arrived. 7 executives, all looking concerned and curious about why the notoriously hands-on CEO had been absent for nearly a month. Alexander took his seat at the head of the table and began the meeting. He discussed quarterly projections, approved expansion plans for 2 new locations, and addressed concerns about staffing shortages. He was in full CEO mode, commanding and competent, when the door to the private dining room opened. Michelle walked in carrying a tray of coffee and pastries. She was working the lunch shift, and someone had clearly asked her to bring refreshments to the meeting. Alexander froze. Michelle froze. Their eyes met across the room, and he watched understanding dawn on her face. She looked at him in his expensive suit, seated at the head of the table like he owned the place, because he did own the place. She looked at the executives calling him Mr. Sterling, asking for his approval, treating him with deference. And then she looked back at his face, at the man she knew as Alex the consultant, and saw the lie written in his expression. The tray slipped from her hands. Coffee and pastries crashed to the floor in a spectacular mess. The room fell silent. "Michelle." Alexander started standing. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't you dare." She turned and ran from the room. Alexander did not think. He abandoned his meeting, his executives, his carefully maintained professional persona, and ran after her. He caught up with her in the parking lot. She was fumbling with her car keys, tears streaming down her face. "Michelle, please let me explain." "Explain what?" she shouted, whirling to face him. "That you're not Alex the consultant, that you're Alexander Sterling, the billionaire CEO, that you own the restaurant where I work, that you've been lying to me this entire time." "Yes," Alexander said desperately, "all of that, but also that my feelings are real, that everything between us is real." "How can it be real when you've been lying about who you are?" Michelle's voice cracked. "I told you everything, Alex, everything. About my dad, about my struggles, about my dreams and my fears. And you just sat there pretending to be someone you're not." "I wasn't pretending about the things that matter," Alexander insisted. "I'm still dying, Michelle. That's real. My feelings for you are real. The rest is just details." "Details?" Michelle laughed bitterly. "You're a billionaire, and I'm a waitress drowning in medical debt. You own the restaurant where I work. You probably knew everything about me before we even met. How is any of that just details?" Alexander flinched because she was right. He had looked up her file, had investigated her situation, had used his resources and his position in ways she had not consented to. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right. I should have told you from the beginning, but I was scared that if you knew who I really was, you'd see me differently. You'd see the CEO and the money and the empire, not just the man. That man doesn't exist, Alex. Or should I call you Alexander now? I don't even know who you are." She wiped at her tears angrily. "Do you know what the worst part is? My dad knew, didn't he? That's what you two were laughing about. That's why he looked at me like I was a fool when I called you a consultant." Alexander's silence was answer enough. "Oh my God," Michelle breathed. "You told my dying father the truth, but not me. You let me believe in this fantasy while you and he shared a secret. How could you do that?" "He was worried about what would happen to you after he died," Alexander said. "I wanted him to know that you'd be taken care of, that I had made arrangements." "Arrangements?" Michelle's voice went very quiet. "What kind of arrangements?" "Your medical debt will be paid off when I die," Alexander said. "And there's a trust fund for your education, for your future. You won't have to work at Sterling Heights anymore. You can go back to school, become a teacher like you wanted. You'll be financially secure for the rest of your life." The slap came so fast that Alexander did not see it coming. His head snapped to the side, and he tasted blood where his lip had split against his teeth. "How dare you?" Michelle hissed. "How dare you play God with my life? I don't want your money, Alexander. I never wanted your money. I wanted honesty and respect, and maybe, God help me, I wanted love. But apparently that was too much to ask from a man who thinks he can buy his way into heaven by playing the generous benefactor." "That's not fair," Alexander protested. "I was trying to help." No, you were trying to assuage your guilt. You're dying and you want to feel like you did something good with all that money. Well, congratulations. You found a poor girl to be your charity case. Does it make you feel better about yourself? Does it ease the pain of knowing you're going to die alone in your empty penthouse? I'm not going to die alone, Alexander said, and his voice broke. I have you. You had me, Michelle corrected. Past tense. You had someone who cared about you for who you were, not what you owned. You had someone who understood what you were going through because she was living it too. But you threw that away when you lied, when you decided I wasn't important enough to know the truth. You're the most important person in my life, Alexander said desperately. These past weeks with you have been the only thing that made my diagnosis bearable. You made me want to live, Michelle. Even knowing I was dying, you made me want every single moment I had left. Then why did you lie to me? Michelle asked, and now she was crying in earnest, her face crumpling with grief. If I meant so much to you, why couldn't you just be honest? Because I was terrified, Alexander admitted. I've spent my entire adult life being Alexander Sterling, CEO. People treat me differently because of who I am, what I have. They want things from me, or they're intimidated by me, or they kiss up to me. But you, Michelle, you saw me. Just me. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was enough exactly as I was. I did not want to lose that. I did not want to lose you. Michelle shook her head. You lost me anyway, the second you chose the lie over the truth. She finally got her car door open and climbed inside. Alexander stood helplessly, watching her fumble with her keys. Michelle, please. We can work through this. I'll tell you everything. No more secrets. Just give me another chance. I can't, Michelle said, and her voice was hollow. I'm already watching my father die, Alexander, whoever you are. I can't watch you die too, knowing that our entire relationship was built on lies. I just can't. She started the car. Alexander stepped back, knowing he had lost this fight. I love you, he said, and the words felt inadequate but true. I know that doesn't fix anything, but it's the truth. I love you, Michelle. Michelle looked at him through her tears. I loved you too. I loved Alex, the consultant who understood what it was like to be running out of time. But I don't know if I can love Alexander Sterling, the man who thought he knew what was best for me better than I did. And I don't think I'll ever get the chance to find out. She drove away, and Alexander stood in the parking lot watching her leave for what might be the last time. His phone was ringing. Probably his executives wondering where he had gone, why he had abandoned their meeting. He ignored it. Behind him, the restaurant continued operating, his empire rolling on without him. Staff moved through their shifts, customers enjoyed their meals, money exchanged hands. The machine he had built kept working, indifferent to the fact that its creator was dying and had just lost the only thing that mattered. Alexander walked to his car on numb legs. He got inside and sat there, staring at nothing. His phone rang again. Doctor. Harrison this time. He let it go to voicemail. What was the point? The doctor would tell him he had days left, maybe hours, would prescribe more medication, more pain management, more false hope. But Alexander already knew he was dying. He had known for weeks. What he had not known was that the real death would not come from cancer. It would come from watching Michelle drive away, taking his heart with her. He drove home in a daze and collapsed on his penthouse couch. The space felt even emptier than usual, haunted by the ghost of the man he had pretended to be. His phone buzzed with a text. It was Robert Parker. Robert, Michelle just told me what happened. She's devastated. Alexander's fingers moved across the screen. Alexander, I'm sorry, I never meant to hurt her. Robert, but you did. You chose the lie over her trust. That's not something easily forgiven. Alexander, I know. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her everything I said was true, even if the circumstances were false. Robert, tell her yourself. If you love her like you say you do, then fight for her. You're dying, Alexander. Do you really want to spend your last days regretting the choice you made today? The message hit like a punch to the gut. Robert was right. Alexander had maybe a week left, and he had just wasted precious time lying when he should have been loving. He stood up, decision made. He would fight for Michelle. He would grovel, beg, do whatever it took to make her understand. He would lay himself bare, every truth, every feeling, every desperate hope. And if she still rejected him, at least he would die knowing he had tried. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door. But before he could reach it, his vision swam. The room tilted sideways. Pain lanced through his abdomen, so sharp and sudden that he cried out. He collapsed to the floor, his phone clattering away from his hand. The cancer was winning. Time had run out faster than even Dr. Harrison had predicted. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, Alexander's last conscious thought was of Michelle. Her smile, her kindness, the way she had made him feel alive even while dying. He hoped she would forgive him. He hoped she would remember the good parts and let go of the lies. He hoped she would be happy with the life he had tried to give her even if she did not want it. And then Alexander Sterling knew nothing at all. Michelle drove home through tears that made the road blur into streaks of light. Her hands shook on the steering wheel, and she had to pull over twice because she was crying too hard to see. Alexander Sterling, the billionaire CEO, the man who owned everything, including apparently the right to lie to her face for weeks. She had trusted him. She had opened her heart to him, shared her darkest fears and deepest dreams, believed in the connection they had built, and all of it had been based on a lie. When she finally made it home, her father was awake and waiting. He took one look at her face and held out his frail arms. Michelle collapsed beside his bed, sobbing into his blankets. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Robert said, stroking her hair with a trembling hand. "I should have told you. I should have made him tell you." "You knew," Michelle said, her voice muffled by tears and fabric. "All this time, you knew who he really was." "He told me because he wanted me to know you'd be taken care of," Robert explained. "He made me promise not to tell you. Said he wanted to do it himself when the time was right. I thought he would tell you sooner. I didn't know he'd let it go this long. He made me a charity case, Dad. He set up trust funds and paid off debts and decided my whole future without even asking if that's what I wanted. Like I'm some helpless victim who needs saving." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Are you angry because he helped or because he didn't tell you first?" Michelle pulled back, wiping at her face. "Both. I don't know. Everything feels like a lie now. Was he even really dying, or was that part of the act too?" "He's dying," Robert said firmly. "That part is very real. I saw it in his eyes, Michelle. That look we both know too well. Alexander Sterling is a dying man, just like me." Michelle felt fresh tears well up. "Then I just walked away from him. In his last days, I told him I couldn't be with him and drove away. What kind of person does that make me?" "Human," Robert said gently. "You're hurting because he hurt you. That's okay. But Michelle, can I tell you something?" "What?" "In 40 years of marriage, your mother and I had our share of fights. Some of them were doozies, but she taught me something important. She said that when someone you love makes a mistake, you have to ask yourself 2 questions. First, did they do it out of malice or out of fear? And second, is the mistake bigger than the love?" Michelle looked at her father through her tears. "Alex was scared," she admitted. "He said people treat him differently because of who he is. That I was the first person to see him as just a man." "And is his lie bigger than how you feel about him?" Robert asked. Michelle closed her eyes. She thought about Alex bringing her coffee and pastries. Alex holding her hand in the dark theater. Alex meeting her father with such respect and kindness. Alex kissing her like she was precious, like she mattered, like loving her was the most important thing in the world. "No," she whispered. "The lie isn't bigger than the love." "Then maybe," Robert said gently, "you should tell him that, before it's too late." Michelle's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Dr. Harrison. a number she did not recognize, but that sent ice through her veins nonetheless. She answered with shaking hands. "Is this Michelle Parker?" a professional voice asked. "Yes. This is Dr. Harrison. I'm Alexander Sterling's oncologist. Your number was listed as his emergency contact. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Sterling collapsed at his home earlier today. He's currently in the ICU at Memorial Hospital. His condition is critical." The phone slipped from Michelle's fingers. She was moving before she realized it, grabbing her purse, her keys, her jacket. "Michelle," her father called. "Where are you going?" "To the hospital," Michelle said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the panic flooding her system. "I have to go, Dad. I have to see him." "Go," Robert said. "I'll call the nurse. Go be with him." Michelle kissed her father's forehead and ran. The drive to Memorial Hospital was a blur. She parked illegally and sprinted through the front doors, demanding to know where Alexander Sterling was being treated. The ICU was on the 4th floor. She took the stairs because waiting for the elevator felt impossible. When she burst through the ICU doors, breathless and wild-eyed, a nurse intercepted her. "I'm here for Alexander Sterling," Michelle gasped. "Are you family?" the nurse asked. "I'm his fiancée," Michelle lied without hesitation. The nurse's expression softened. "Room 412. But Ms. Parker, you should know that Mr. Sterling's condition is very grave. The cancer has progressed significantly. The doctors are doing everything they can to make him comfortable, but..." She did not need to finish the sentence. Michelle nodded and walked on numb legs to room 412. Dr. Harrison was standing outside reviewing a chart. He looked up as she approached. "Michelle Parker," he asked. "I'm glad you came. Alexander has been asking for you." "He's conscious?" "Barely," Dr. Harrison said. "We've given him medication for the pain, but he's fighting sedation. He keeps saying your name." Michelle's eyes filled with tears. "Can I see him?" "Of course. But Michelle, I need to be honest with you. We're looking at hours, maybe a day at most. His body is shutting down. I'm sorry." Michelle nodded and pushed open the door to room 412. Nothing could have prepared her for what she saw. Alexander looked so small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors. His skin was grey, his cheeks hollowed out, his breathing labored. He looked like her father, like every dying patient she had ever seen. He looked like a man at the end. "Alex," she whispered, moving to his bedside. His eyes fluttered open. When he saw her, something like relief washed over his face. "Michelle," he breathed, and the word was barely audible. "You came." "Of course I came," Michelle said, taking his hand. It was so cold. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I walked away. I was hurt and angry, and I said terrible things." "You had every right," Alexander said, each word an effort. "I lied to you. I should have told you from the beginning who I was. But Michelle, I need you to know. Everything else was real. My feelings were real. You were the best thing that happened to me in my whole life." Michelle was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. "You were the best thing that happened to me, too. These past weeks with you, even with the lies, they were the happiest I've been since Mom died. You made me feel seen, Alex. You made me feel like I mattered." "You do matter," Alexander insisted. "You matter more than anything. More than my company, more than my fortune, more than my own life. I would trade everything, every dollar, every achievement, for just one more day with you." "I forgive you," Michelle said, leaning close. "For the lies, for the secrets, for all of it. I forgive you, Alex. And I love you. I love you so much." Alexander's hand tightened slightly around hers. "I love you too. I'm sorry I don't have more time to show you how much." "We have time now," Michelle said. "However much you have left, we'll make it count. Remember? That's what we promised." She climbed into the narrow hospital bed beside him, careful of the IVs and monitors. Alexander shifted to make room, and Michelle tucked herself against his side, her head on his shoulder, her hand over his heart. They lay there in silence, listening to the machines beep and hum. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. "Tell me about your dream," Alexander said quietly. "When you become a teacher, tell me what your classroom will look like." Michelle smiled through her tears. "It'll have big windows," she said, "lots of natural light, and there will be a reading corner with beanbags and pillows. I'll have a carpet where the kids can sit in a circle for story time. And the walls will be covered in their artwork, because every kid deserves to see their creativity celebrated." "It sounds perfect," Alexander said. "You'll be an amazing teacher." "I wish you could see it," Michelle whispered. "I wish we had more time." "We have this moment," Alexander said, "and this moment is enough." They talked quietly as darkness fell. Michelle told him about her favorite children's books, the ones she wanted to read to her future students. Alexander told her about the first restaurant he ever opened, the terror and thrill of building something from nothing. They shared memories and dreams, making the most of the time they had left. Around midnight, Alexander's breathing changed. Michelle felt it, the shift in his body, the way he seemed to be pulling away from her, even though she held him tight. "Michelle," he said, and his voice was getting weaker. "I need to tell you something." "What is it, my?" "The trust fund, the money I set aside for you. I know you said you didn't want it, but please, use it to become a teacher. Use it to build the life you deserve. Don't let my mistake rob you of your dreams." "Okay," Michelle promised. "I'll use it. I'll become a teacher, and I'll dedicate my first classroom to you. A plaque on the wall that says, 'In memory of Alexander Sterling, who taught me that it's never too late to chase your dreams.'" Alexander smiled, and even in his dying state it was beautiful. "That's perfect." "Alex," Michelle said, feeling time slipping away. "Don't go, please don't go." "I don't want to," Alexander whispered. "But Michelle, when I do, promise me something." "Anything. Promise me you'll be happy. Promise me you'll live a full life with no regrets. Promise me you'll find love again, someone who deserves you, someone who tells you the truth from the start." "I can't promise that," Michelle said, crying. "How can I love someone else when my heart belongs to you?" "Because I want you to," Alexander said. "Because loving you was the best thing I ever did, and I want you to feel that again. To be loved completely, honestly, without secrets. You deserve that, Michelle. Promise me." "I promise," Michelle said, even though the words felt like breaking. "I promise I'll try." Alexander's breathing was getting shallower. His eyes were starting to close. "Thank you," he whispered, "for forgiving me, for being here, for loving me even when I didn't deserve it." "You deserved it," Michelle said fiercely. "You deserved all of it. You were a good man, Alex, flawed and scared and human, but good. And I'm so grateful I met you." "Me too," Alexander breathed. His hand in hers was growing limp. "Michelle, But whatever he was going to say was lost. His chest rose one more time, fell, and did not rise again. The monitors began to alarm, a steady, high-pitched whine that brought nurses running. But Michelle already knew. She felt it in the sudden stillness of his body, the absence where his heartbeat had been. Alexander Sterling was gone. Michelle held him as the nurses gently tried to pull her away. She held him as Dr. Harrison came in and pronounced the time of death. She held him until finally, gently, a kind nurse named Sarah convinced her to let go. She walked out of the hospital in a daze. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple. A new day was beginning, one that Alexander would never see. Michelle went home and crawled into bed beside her father. Robert held her while she cried, asking no questions, offering no platitudes. He just held his daughter and let her grieve. 3 days later, they buried Alexander Sterling. The funeral was massive, filled with business associates and employees, and people Michelle had never met. But she sat in the front row, holding her father's hand, and said goodbye to the man who had been Alex to her, the man who had taught her that love could exist even in the darkest of times. In his will, Alexander had left specific instructions. The trust fund for Michelle was real and substantial. Her father's medical debt was paid off entirely. And there was a letter, handwritten, that his lawyer gave her after the service. "My dearest Michelle, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And hopefully you don't hate me too much for lying. I want you to know that every moment I spent with you was a gift. You made my last weeks on earth meaningful in a way I never thought possible. The money is yours, no strings attached. Use it to become the teacher you always dreamed of being. Fill your classroom with light and laughter and children who know they are loved. And when you do, think of me sometimes. Not with sadness, but with the joy we shared in our brief time together. I love you, Michelle Parker. I loved you from the moment I saw you crying in that dark restaurant. I loved you through every coffee date and stolen kiss. I will love you beyond death, into whatever comes next. Be happy, my darling. Live fully, and know that you were, and always will be, the best thing that ever happened to me. Yours forever." Alex Michelle read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in a box with his other gifts to her. A photograph of them together. A pressed flower from their walk in the park. The $500 he had first given her, which she had never spent. Treasures from a love that had burned bright and brief, like a shooting star across her life. 6 months later, Michelle stood in front of a classroom full of 8-year-olds. The room had big windows and a reading corner with beanbags. The walls were covered in artwork, and on the back wall there was a bronze plaque, "In memory of Alexander Sterling, who taught me it's never too late to chase your dreams." Her father had died 3 weeks after Alexander, slipping away peacefully in his sleep. Michelle had grieved them both, had felt like she was drowning in loss. But she had kept her promises. She had used the money to pay off debts and return to school. She had earned her teaching certificate. She had built the life Alexander had wanted for her, and now, as she looked at the eager faces of her students, Michelle felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. One of the children raised her hand. "Miss Parker, who was Alexander Sterling?" Michelle smiled. "He was someone very special to me. Someone who taught me that even when life is hard, there are moments of unexpected joy, and that those moments are worth fighting for." The little girl nodded solemnly, satisfied with the answer. The school day began. Michelle taught math and reading, helped settle disputes at recess, wiped away tears and celebrated successes. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. That evening, as she locked up her classroom, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. "Hi, Michelle. This is David, your brother. I know we haven't talked in years, but I heard about Dad. I'm sorry I wasn't there, and I heard you became a teacher. I'm proud of you." Michelle stared at the message for a long moment. Part of her wanted to delete it, to hold on to the anger she had carried for so long. But then she thought of Alexander, of the mistakes he had made and the forgiveness she had given. She thought of her father, who had always hoped his children would reconcile. She thought of her promise to live fully with no regrets. She typed a response. "Michelle, thank you. It's been a hard year, but I'm okay. We should talk sometime when you're ready." The response came quickly. "David, I'd like that. Maybe I could visit during your summer break." "Michelle, I'd like that too." She put her phone away and walked to her car. The evening was cool and clear, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Michelle looked up at them and smiled. "I did it, Alex," she whispered to the universe. "I became a teacher. I'm chasing my dreams, and I'm happy, not every day, but more and more. Just like you wanted." A breeze rustled through the trees, gentle and warm, despite the autumn chill. Michelle chose to believe it was Alexander, giving his approval from wherever he was now. She drove home to her small apartment, the one she had been able to afford after the debt was paid. She made dinner, graded papers, video-called with a friend from her teaching program. Normal things, beautiful, mundane, precious things. Before bed, Michelle opened the box where she kept Alexander's letter. She read it one more time, letting the words wash over her. Then she carefully put it away and turned off the light. Tomorrow, she would wake up and teach 23 children about math and kindness and the joy of learning. She would eat lunch with her fellow teachers and laugh at their jokes. She would go home and maybe text her brother, rebuilding a relationship she had thought was lost. She would live, fully, completely, with purpose and hope, just as Alexander had wanted, just as she had promised. And in her heart, Michelle carried the memory of a dying man who had taught her to live, a liar who had shown her truth, a stranger who had become the love of a lifetime, brief though that lifetime had been. She closed her eyes and dreamed of big windows and reading corners, of children's laughter and Alexander's smile, of her father's pride and a future full of possibility. Michelle Parker fell asleep, wrapped in gratitude for the time she'd been given, the love she had known, and the life she was building from the ashes of loss. And somewhere in whatever came after, Alexander Sterling smiled too.